So let's get started. So a little bit about me. For those of you that have not met me before, I have done a couple of trainings for Heart prior to Christmas. But for those of you not met me, I'm a clinical nutritional therapist and registered nutritionist. I have over 15 years experience working in this field. I work primarily in clinics, so I work a lot one-to-one with children, their families and adults as well, supporting them with dietary guidance and nutritional interventions. I also work in a lot of different settings, and neurodiversity and restrictive eating is one of my specialist areas that I work in. I've got a lot of experience working in special educational needs schools, both residential and day schools. I currently work in a school one-to-one with neurodivergent teenagers who need support with their eating for a variety of reasons, but lots of children I see are those diagnosed with ARFID or restrictive eaters. And I have my own experience. That's what sparked my interest in this area. My 17-year-old now daughter is ADHD, has gone through periods of very restrictive eating. So I've lived it myself. I know the experience myself, and which is why I'm so incredibly passionate about this area. Of course, I just want to really say, you know, I do my best to be neurodivergent affirming, and I'm learning language all the time. And I think there's lots of different ways of describing, supporting neurodivergent people, and I'm doing my best to get it right. I never, ever want to offend anybody, and I'm always welcoming any feedback. If you feel that I haven't said something quite right, please do let me know. And I just also want to really say, of course, you know, this is not about curing neurodivergence, right? I mean, I would never use that word cure anyway. That's not what I do. You know, it's not about saying nutrition can resolve neurodivergence. Of course it cannot. Yeah, I was just saying, you know, this is not about nutrition. Nutrition can't cure neurodivergence, right? But what it can do is really help reduce some of the challenges, reduce that exacerbation of pre-existing genetic traits that might be there. We know there are links with, you know, diet and various neurodivergent challenges. And it can really help with some of the challenges that come as part of being neurodivergent. For example, a lot of the gut issues that we see in young children, a lot of the challenges with anxiety, it can help to form a complementary approach. But it's a big toolkit, right? I mean, there's so many tools we have in our toolkits, and nutrition is a really, really important part of it. You know, the brain is a really, really hungry organ, and you know what we tend to see is obviously neurodivergent children, often their nervous systems are highly challenged, right, by being a neurodivergent individual in a neurotypical world. And when our nervous systems are on continual, let's say, overdrive or being overly challenged, that uses up more nutrition. And nutrition is so important for our brain because the brain is really, really hungry. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start just to kind of delve a little bit into why nutrition is really important with a neurodivergent lens, what we can really think about adding in. And I really think those words are important, adding in, right? So, you know, I think in society nowadays, and particularly it's January, we're hearing so much about what not to eat. I mean, there's even a documentary on Channel 4, isn't there, called What Not to Eat at the moment. Don't know if you've seen it. I think it's kind of useful, but you know, we hear so much about what we shouldn't eat. And I really like to speak about children's nutrition and encourage you to work in this way, and encourage you to work in this way with the families you work with as well. What can we add in to the diet that's really going to help support every single child to thrive? Because I think if you go at it with parents, you know, oh, don't give them this, don't give them that, you're going to get, you know, people with, you know, metaphorically with their hands over their ears, because we're so overwhelmed by what we shouldn't do, that some families just feel, what can I feed my child? And particularly that's relevant, you know, when we're thinking about neurodivergent individuals where there might be restrictive or sensory eating. We've got to keep them eating, right? So we're really trying to adjust the diet and crowd out with the good stuff. So over time, there might be less of the stuff that's not going to be so helpful for them, but we can't just take it all away, right? We've got to really focus on what we need to add in. So key nutrients is going to be protein, particularly for glycemic control and neurotransmitters. It's about getting in the right fats, which is really, really important for the brain. And key vitamins and minerals we'll have a look at today. And then the gut-brain axis and thinking about the microbiome balance, so vital for neurodivergent individuals. And we'll just touch on sensory issues around food if we have time, but that's something I'm really going to cover in more detail in part 2, which is coming up in March. So let's get started. As I said earlier, if you've met one neurodivergent individual, you've met one neurodivergent individual. Everybody is different, and every body and every brain is biologically unique. It is a spectrum, neurodivergence. So, people will experience it very, very differently. And of course, each individual child that you work with may have been given unique and personal medical advice. It's really important that you, of course, follow that. What I'm giving you today is general information that you can then hopefully tailor to each individual that you work with. And this is not alternative medicine, as I said. It's not about curing autism or curing neurodivergence. It's a complementary approach, so part of your toolkit, and really supporting a young person's ability to thrive, and really can work alongside medical support as well. For example, nutrition might even support the efficacy of prescribed medication. So we know, for example, that if someone is taking ADHD medication, they are much more likely to have a better response to it if their magnesium and their iron and their zinc levels are at a more optimal level. They're much less likely to experience side effects from ADHD medication. And of course, someone on ADHD medication, their appetite might be affected. So it's really important that we think about their nutrition and making sure that they don't become nutrient deficient. Of course, neurodiversity is an umbrella term that encompasses so many different diagnoses. I don't necessarily like the word diagnoses, but that's a society that we live in. So it covers, things like ADHD, autism, ODD, PDA, dyslexia, dyspraxia, even epilepsy is under that neurodivergent umbrella, dyscalculia, executive function difficulties, highly sensitive person, OCD, sensory processing. We're seeing more and more coming under this kind of umbrella of neurodivergence. Maybe one day it will just be, that someone is just, neurodivergent rather than having all these individual diagnoses. Maybe, I don't know. But you'll see lots and lots of different conditions. And of course, children can be diagnosed with one or many. For example, autistic children are quite likely to have OCD traits. They're quite likely to experience anxiety. They're quite likely to also be highly sensitive, have sensory processing and executive function difficulties. We are seeing more and more children diagnosed with DHD, which is autistic and ADHD. So let's think about, why does good nutrition matter? Well, for all children, nutrition is the building blocks of life. Think about it like your Lego bricks, if you like, building everything that we are, from our bones to our muscles, to our organs, to hair, skin, nails, teeth. It is the building blocks of life. And we also need good nutrition for our fuel and to protect, repair and maintain. So for keeping us in good health. And, we often think so much physically about nutrition, but nutrition is just so vital also for our brain and how it functions. The way that we think also really does depend on getting optimal nutrition into our diet. And so that's why I really believe that nutrition is such an important part of our toolkit when we're trying to support each and every child's ability to achieve and be their best. And if we put a neurodivergent lens on that, what we see in neurodivergent children and adults is that there is a higher risk of some nutritional deficiencies, maybe because of the challenges of neurodiversity, and also because certain ways and patterns in how our brain works can mean that we have a higher need for certain nutrients as well. So what we tend to see in neurodivergent individuals is high levels of stress, that nervous system challenge. We tend to see more gut issues, which of course can create more challenges with absorbing our nutrition, but also can, create digestive system symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, bloating, wind, that kind of thing. I'm sure you see it a lot in those children that either have diagnosis of a neurodivergence or you suspect have neurodivergence. Poor sleep, really a big challenge. Sensory challenges with food, which of course can create more risk of nutritional deficiencies, and as I said, a higher need for some nutrients. And the brain really can become nutrient deficient, and it might not be that that's necessarily driving the neurodiversity, but it can be driven by the neurodiversity, that the brain becomes more and more nutrient deficient, and that then can exacerbate potentially some of the challenges that are being experienced. So why do we need nutrition? So let's think about that with that neurodivergent lens. So this word neurotransmitters, you might have heard of it, you might have heard of some. So there's lots and lots of neurotransmitters that I'm going to introduce you today. So neurotransmitters, so if you think neuro means brain, transmit means sending, right? So it's sending brain messages, right? And they're really, really important for the way that our brain communicates, for the way that that we think, how we function. So neurotransmitters you might have heard of are things like serotonin, dopamine, one you've probably heard a lot when you're thinking about ADHD. We need nutrition to be able to feed the gut-brain axis. So there's this constant communication that happens between our gut and our brain. We often hear this term that our gut is our second brain, right? And it is true because, you know, so much, actually 95% of our serotonin is made in our gut, 50% of our dopamine. So a lot of our neurotransmitters are coming from our gut, and a big part in that role of that gut-brain axis is the gut microbiome. So that's all those trillions and trillions of organisms that live in our digestive system that help to make those neurotransmitters, help us absorb our nutrients, and really establish that healthy connection between the gut and the brain. We need nutrition to be able to detox, so the removal of neurotoxins. So, you know, there are some links between high levels of toxic heavy metals and ADHD type symptoms as well. We need to be able to remove the waste and get rid of all of that out of our body. For supporting blood sugar control, some children who are neurodivergent tend to have a much bigger response to sugar and white carbohydrate foods than those that are neurotypical. So particularly with ADHD, they often really struggle with glycemic control, which means they're going to have a much bigger reaction to a small amount of sugar and really potentially struggle to balance their blood sugar, which can have an impact on behavior and thinking and executive function. It's really important as well that we have good nutrition to balance our immunity, to balance inflammation, which again can be underlying challenges for those who are neurodivergent. And it provides that complementary approach to the challenges that we see in those who are neurodivergent, like poor sleep, constipation, diarrhea, weight management, muscle tension, anxiety. We can actually look at nutrition to help manage some of these challenges. And I think it's really, really important to remember here, and I always emphasize this, is that you don't have to have a low BMI to be malnourished. We are such a weight-centric society. I mean, it's so at the center, particularly this time of year, isn't it? You know, but we are all different body shapes and sizes. So no matter what a child's, BMI is, they can be overweight and still be malnourished because they might be getting enough energy from a diet perhaps like this beige brown food, but they're nutrient deficient. They're not getting enough vitamins and minerals. So, you know, it needs to be a very nutrient dense diet. And a lot of our children, whether they're neurodivergent or not, they're not eating a nutrition dense diet. It tends to be higher in calories, but not a nutrient dense enough diet to really feed a thriving brain. So we talked a little bit about neurotransmitters. So I'm just going to introduce you to a few. I think there's a few that are really, really kind of key to point out. We've talked a little bit about dopamine. So that's our attention, our pleasure neurotransmitter. Often low in ADHD. It might be that someone struggles to make dopamine. It might be that they actually make enough dopamine, but they don't respond to it very well. It might be actually that they make enough dopamine, they respond to it well, but they actually get rid of it too quickly. So there's lots and lots of factors that can influence our dopamine levels, our neurotransmitter levels. I'll just point out two at the bottom here. GABA is a really, really important one for ADHD, particularly. It's like our off switch. A lot of children with ADHD genetically are not very good at making GABA. We need a lot of zinc and B6 to be able to make GABA. So it's the off switch, and it's the opposite to glutamate. Glutamate is actually this excitatory neurotransmitter. It's not a calming neurotransmitter. It's the one that's really good for our memory, but it can really stimulate hyperactivity if it is overstimulated. If you think about that word glutamate, monosodium glutamate. So that is one of the reasons why MSG potentially might be exacerbating ADHD challenges. So MSG is that additive that we see in food because it overstimulates our glutamate receptors, which is this excitatory neurotransmitter, makes us a little bit more hyperactive. So we've got to get this balance between them is really, really, really important. So trying to create balance, we don't want too much of anything. Even too much of dopamine can create anxiety, right? So it's all about bringing our body back into balance. But you've got there the chemical structure. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into a really in-depth science lesson on a Wednesday morning. But if you look at all of those little molecules and how they're put together, what are they made from? Like, where do we get? How does the body do that? I mean, the body is fascinating and amazing how this is all going on in our body all the time, right? How does our body know how to do this? What makes all those little atoms and come together in the right shape? Like, what actually is the building blocks of those? Well, it's our food. You know, how do we make them? It's our food. I'm going to give you a little example. I've really broken this down to make it quite simple. But how do we make dopamine? So here's dopamine. This is the end product here. And we use this to make noradrenaline, another neurotransmitter, which is our executive function. So here's our dopamine, our pleasure, our attention neurotransmitter. We're going to go all the way back. How do we make it? So we need amino acids to be able to build dopamine, right? It's like, think of it like Lego bricks, right? We need amino acids. Where do we get amino acids from? Protein, right? So amino acids are these building blocks for protein. So if a child is not eating enough protein, they're really going to struggle to make their neurotransmitters, right? So we need to make sure that there is sufficient protein in the diet. So for children that are neurodivergent, it's one of the reasons I talk about trying to get some protein with breakfast is really, really important. And it is the meal where protein is often lacking. Now, I know the early years nutrition guidelines don't stress protein so much with breakfast, but in neurodivergent children, and I would say pretty much in most children, they really do benefit from a little bit of protein at breakfast. So we need these amino acids to be able to make the dopamine, but also we need a lot of nutrients to be able to convert those amino acids and put them together in the right combination, like a jigsaw, to be able to make dopamine. So if we are low in iron and folate, which is vitamin B9, if we are low in zinc and we're low in vitamin B6, we're going to potentially struggle to be able to make enough dopamine, right? And some people genetically, they have slight alterations in these pathways, which means they're not so good at making that dopamine. And that's where potentially a big part of the genetic risk factor for neurodiversity comes in, is that we inherit challenges with potentially making some of the compounds that we need to support optimal brain function. So that's the bit often that is inheritable, not being able to complete these pathways particularly well. Now, once we've made our dopamine, we also need to be able to convert it into noradrenaline, which is, or norepinephrine if you're from American background. We need to be able to convert it, and we need copper and vitamin C to do that. So you think about potentially some children who really struggle to eat any vegetables or fruit. That is our main source of vitamin C, particularly raw vegetables and fruit, because vitamin C is a nutrient that is destroyed by heat. Another place our ancestors used to get vitamin C, particularly, was in things like sauerkraut. When you actually ferment and pickle cabbage, it really increases the vitamin C. So over the winter, that's where our ancestors, if we had ancestors that were living in colder climates, would not have been able to get vitamin C unless they were fermenting, vegetables, particularly things like cabbage. But you can see in our neurodivergent children, we also really, really need to make sure that we're getting some of that vitamin C in so that they can then make that noradrenaline for executive function. So it's really fascinating stuff. And I really like to show these diagrams just to really highlight actually where nutrition plays such an important role. And we know that our diets are changing, right? And it's not just neurodivergent children where the diets are changing. Across the board, our nation's diets are changing. And in the UK, we have one of the highest intakes of ultra-processed foods in the world. About 60% of the food consumed by children in the UK, on average, comes from ultra-processed foods. Some children are obviously eating a lot less. Some children are actually eating a lot more. Less than 1 in 5 primary age children eat 5 a day. And also almost a third of primary school age children eat less than one vegetable a day. And of course, low fruit and veg intake does correlate with poor mental health across adolescence. What do we know about neurodivergent children? They also have co-occurring mental health challenges. Often you see depression, anxiety, OCD, for example, and that is going to be exacerbated by a poor diet, because if we're not nourishing the brain, it can't make enough serotonin, it can't make enough noradrenaline, it can't make enough dopamine. And high versus low intake of ultra-processed foods has been found to be linked to a lot of health challenges, including higher risk of anxiety, sleep problems, and other mental health symptoms, and increase in depression. So you can see how our diet is also really, really, really important. We know that there are nutrient shortfalls that are really, really common in primary school and preschool age children. 88% of 1.5 to 3-year-olds, this is a 2023 report, are not meeting fibre targets. We've talked a little bit about that gut microbiome already. We know that fibre is really important for feeding a healthy gut microbiome. More than 10% of preschool age children are at risk of iron deficiency. I've already just talked about how iron is really important for making dopamine. A fifth of 4-year-olds have insufficient zinc intake. Zinc is one of the most important nutrients for the brain. Again, we need it to make dopamine. We need it to make that GABA, which is our off switch that we've just talked about. So you can see, really start to think about how these specific nutrient potential shortfalls might be impacting how the brain is functioning. As I'm saying, it's not about this is causing ADHD or this is causing autism. Of course, it's not that, but it's potentially going to be exacerbating the challenges for these young people. And long-term intake of ultra-processed food has been associated with differences in brain morphology. So that's the shape and the function in the brain, which is why they're saying there might be a relation between dietary patterns and neurodevelopment in children. Again, not causing, but potentially exacerbating a pre-existing genetic trait or potential risk for it. And it's not just in junk food, of course. Ultra processed foods are, we see a lot of ultra processed foods in that kind of, under 3 packaged foods as well. Those little kind of, crispy things and the little fruit winders and things like that are considered ultra processed foods. So what we're seeing in our modern Western diet is it's very high in sugar or sweeteners. Obviously, no added sugar does not mean no added sweeteners. Sweeteners are known to drive a sweet tooth and disrupt the gut microbiome. High levels of refined white carbohydrates, processed fats, omega-6 fats, and not enough key nutrients. And a lot of these nutrients are so important for our brain, like omega-3, like quality protein, like essential vitamins and minerals, like all that rainbow of different extracts that we get in plants that are so important for our health, our immune system, our brain, managing inflammation, supporting the gut microbiome. So lots to think about there. I'm going to move on now just to cover blood sugar regulation, which is really important. As I said, it's one of the most important concepts when it comes to brain health, particularly managing more impulsive, hyperactive type behavior, emotional dysregulation as well. And in my experience of working with neurodivergent children, families report actually this is one of the simplest but most effective things when it comes to supporting neurodivergent children, is keeping that blood sugar level balanced. So I'll just explain what we mean. So when we eat, our blood sugar naturally goes up and down. Some of you will have seen this graph before, but I think it's just important to recap here with a neurodivergent lens. So as we eat, our blood sugar goes up, body responds with a little bit of insulin, and that blood sugar comes nicely back down again, hopefully. So on this nice gentle up and down all day. So our blood sugar doesn't stay static. It naturally goes up when we eat. And anything that we eat, it will be digested by our body and releases glucose into our blood. And that hormone insulin comes in and gets it out of our blood and into our cells for energy, or into our cells for storage if we don't need that sugar at that time. And what we want to really avoid is this blood sugar dysregulation. Okay, so you imagine that we're having something very sweet for breakfast, like a bowl of Cocoa Pops and a big glass of orange juice. What will happen is our blood sugar will go up way too high too fast because of that high level of sugar, and the body will respond and release far too much insulin because it doesn't want our blood sugar to be too high, because high blood sugar is dangerous. It's always trying to keep things in narrow limits. So we get this big crash down of blood sugar. And actually, it's when that big crash down happens that we then start releasing stress hormones. hormones. So a big crash like that, because we've released too much insulin, we've overcompensated, the body picks that up as a stress, and it doesn't distinguish that stress any differently from, oh, there's a tiger over there that's about to eat me, or, something bad's going to happen. Our body still thinks that we're cavemen and women. It still responds in the same way. So more stress hormones are released. So we're placing more stress on that nervous system. Potentially in a neurodivergent child, that nervous system is already dysregulated. And we know in ADHD children, for example, they tend to have a much bigger response to sugar. So much more dysregulation is likely to happen. So as we release those stress hormones, body goes into that fight or flight, that caveman response. We think we're about to be eaten by a bear. And so what it starts doing is it actually starts making us feel a little bit on edge, right? It makes us more difficult to control our emotions. It makes us ready to fight. Someone taps you on the shoulder, you're much more dysregulated with your responses to things. And you can see how potentially this might impact an already quite dysregulated child. It's going to cause more potential emotional dysregulation. So really what we want to do is try to work on blood sugar balance. So symptoms of blood sugar dysregulation include dizziness, tiredness, irritability, mood swings, crying spells, hangriness, poor concentration, brain fog, difficulty sleeping, sugar cravings, poor stress management, clumsiness. How many of these symptoms do you recognize in neurodivergent individuals? I would probably say about 80%, maybe even 100% of those symptoms. And of course, I'm not saying blood sugar imbalance is the only reason why we're experiencing that, but it's to help you understand that blood sugar dysregulation is not going to help when these characteristics and challenges are present, and potentially going to exacerbate these symptoms. So what we really need to think about is balancing blood sugar. So what we start with is really thinking about what we add in. So fiber, protein and fat, like really trying to get those in with every single meal. And protein there, you can see we've talked about neurotransmitter balance of protein and fat and fiber. The reason that they help with blood sugar balance is because they're digested so much more slowly than, say, sugary white carbohydrate type foods. So we're slowing down that digestion. We're not getting such peaks and troughs of blood sugar, so everything's a little bit more balanced, so the nervous system can be a little bit more regulated, so we're then not exacerbating that emotional regulation. Emotional dysregulation. So let's start with the protein. Hopefully you all know by now, protein is found in meat, fish, seafood, eggs, dairy, nuts, seeds, nut butter. Obviously you might not have those in your setting, but advising parents is really important information for families as well. Beans, pulses, soya, quinoa, buckwheat, of course, protein powders. You're not going to be giving protein powders to young children, but you might if you're working with adolescents, for example. So really trying to get in some protein. I would say, for most neurodivergent children, they need about a fistful size of protein. So that's their fistful size, about the volume of the fist of their hand. I would really recommend that, you try to get some protein in for breakfast. If families are sending their children in having had breakfast at home, encourage them to try to get some protein with breakfast. It might be as simple as, can they put some peanut butter on toast, smooth peanut butter? It's a great way to get nuts in, and there's so many nutrients in peanut butter. Make sure it's unsweetened. A lot of the supermarkets are now doing their own brand peanut butters, which are quite cheap and just nuts and potentially a little bit of salt. Obviously, watch out for the salted ones with very young children. And we should be getting nuts into children's diet from a very young age, because there is now evidence that if we get nuts into children in the early days of weaning, particularly before 12 months, that might reduce their potential for developing allergies to those foods. So getting in those potential allergens at a young age is really, really important. It might be an egg on their toast. It might be some yogurt on their porridge. It might be some seeds in their porridge. It might be an omelette. It might be some pancakes, that kind of thing. So really trying to get a bit of protein with breakfast and with other meals. We want to try to move to whole grains, because whole grains contain more fiber and it is going to then help to balance the blood sugar a little bit more and provide more nutrients like iron and zinc. So can we move more to whole grain breads? Can we move more to whole meal pasta? Obviously with early weaners, we don't want to put in too much whole grain, but obviously we're going to get nice fiber from vegetables and a little bit from pulses and things like that. And just go slowly. If children have never had whole grain bread, you might start with 50-50. You might start keeping the skins on potatoes and making wedges for children that can manage to chew those. And you might add fiber from things like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, pulses, seeds, nuts, and herbs. So I really like this kind of bagel thing that picture that you've got here, because it just helps to understand this analogy of what else can we add? What is one more thing we can add? Keep adding, just to make that meal a little bit healthier, yeah, a little bit more nutritionally valuable. And we can use a little bit of natural sugar to sweeten second dishes, but we obviously want to try to keep sugar down as much as possible. And our children these days eat way more sugar than perhaps when we were children, and way more than our ancestors. You know, when I was a child, it was sweets once a week if I was lucky. I mean, how many children do you see picked up from preschool, from primary school, and they're getting a little, you know, one of those bags of Haribos or a sweet treat every single day, right? We are eating way too much sugar, and that really does have an impact on not only our blood sugar balance, but also on our gut microbiome. So think about fruit as a great way to sweeten. So use the whole fruit rather than juices. You might put some bananas in baking. You can freeze bananas and blend them up with just a dash of milk to make instant ice cream. It's lovely. Berries in baking, adding some fruit to porridge. Just don't forget that honey, maple syrup and agave, they are still forms of sugar. So you can use a little occasionally in baking, but not too much. No honey for under 12 months, of course. Smoothies, not juices. So we want to try to avoid juice and look for smoothies. We can give smoothies to children. I know there's a lot of confusion around this. It's just not putting too much fruit in. You know, there's a lot of difference between one of those innocent smoothies that might have 7 portions of fruit in. There's a lot of sugar in there, not added sugar, it's just fruit sugar. It's too much. But if you're making a smoothie with maximum 1 portion of fruit per child, and that portion is about the fist of their hand, and trying to add in some fiber and some extra fats and proteins. So you might blend in some oats, you might blend in some yogurt and some milk, some seeds if you can have them in your setting. Then you're making that smoothie much more blood sugar balancing. You're not getting so much fruit in there. Dried fruit and tinned fruit, you can use a little bit of dried fruit as part of a meal. So some raisins as part of porridge. Raisins are a great source of zinc and iron. We just want to use a little bit as part of a meal, not as a snack, because we're concerned about oral health. So using that dried fruit in baking. And if you're using tinned fruit, it shouldn't be in syrup, it should be in juice. And you can use sweet spices, things like cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, vanilla. And as I said earlier, low sugar does not mean no added sweeteners. And as we said, aside from blood sugar, that protein is really important to build those neurotransmitters. And then that final macronutrient is the fat. Fat is so important for our brain. It is one of the most researched nutrients when it comes to ADHD, because the brain is over 60% fat. And of that fat, about 60% of the fat found in the brain is omega-3 fat, particularly DHA. And DHA is one of those long-chain omega-3 polyunsaturated fats, particularly that we get from oily fish. There's lots of words to describe omega fats. You might hear omega, polyunsaturated, long chain, essential fats is another word. Every single aspect of neurotransmission, so sending those messages in our brain, requires omega fat, and that balance between omega-6 and omega-3 is really, really important. We need some omega-6, but our diets tend to be too high in omega-6 because we get more omega-6 from things like sunflower oil and vegetable oils, which we see a lot of in ultra-processed foods, and that is often at the expense of omega-3. Where do we get omega-3? Oily fish, nuts and seeds, dark green leafy veg, and there is some in organic dairy and grass-fed meat. I mean, these are not foods that your average family nowadays eats very much of, and we are seeing that, you know, it's really so important, we're seeing in research, to get that omega-3 in. Here's one piece of research going back to 2013. We've known this for some time. They looked at children aged 7 to 9, and they found that a higher blood level of that DHA, which is that omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fat, was associated with better reading, better working memory, improved behavior, better attention and concentration, and better sleep. So having an impact on lots and lots of areas. 2014, they reviewed 20 studies, and they found benefits for getting in omega-3 for inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And they found that omega-3 levels were reduced in children with ADHD. So we tend to see that quite a lot, that blood levels of children with ADHD are often lower in omega-3, and it isn't always correlated with dietary intake. And what that seems to suggest is that those with ADHD potentially have a much higher need for omega-3. And when supplemented with omega-3 supplements, they found that had a modest improvement in symptoms, particularly for those that had low baseline levels. So when levels are low, actually getting in more dietary and more supplementary omega-3 tends to have the most impact on symptoms. DHA is so important for so many aspects of our brain. I'm not going to go through all of these because we haven't got time today, but I'll make sure that these are in the slides. And it's also really important for our vision, our immune health, our blood flow, heart health, hormone balance as well. There's lots and lots of potential signs and symptoms of essential fat deficiency. You see it quite a lot: dry skin, dry eyes, dry hair, dandruff, really common symptoms, which we see a lot in children. Low energy, aggression, irritability, hyperactivity, so relating back to those more ADHD type symptoms again. Excess thirst is another one, and a really common symptom you might see in children, we tend to see it in older children, is pimples on the backs of the arms. It's a bit like raw chicken skin, it looks like. So it's not eczema, it's not open, it's not weeping, it's just lots and lots of bumps on the backs of the arms. So as I said, we get omega-3 from oily fish. To think of the word smash to remember which are the oily fish. It's the fatty fish, sometimes called bluefish, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. They can be frozen, they can be tinned. If you're buying tinned fish, it's better to buy it in olive oil or spring water because you don't want lots of that sunflower oil, which is higher in omega-6. Also seafood, so things like prawns, mussels, that kind of thing. Chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts. And as I said, there is a little in dark green leafy veg. There is a little in seaweed and organic whole dairy and wild and grass-fed meat. So again, not foods that children eat a lot, particularly perhaps not children that come from more challenging socioeconomic backgrounds. So, we do have a responsibility to, I think, try to educate the families that we work with that they need to get more omega-3. That's why, things like nut butters can be a really good addition. There is a little bit in other nuts. Trying to encourage the use of things like flax seeds into porridge and things like that. Sardines on toast, fish pie, and within your menus, if you are creating food within your menus, trying to get some oily fish on the menu. If for those that don't eat fish, can't eat fish, or are more plant-based, we need to get those omega-3s from nuts and seeds, particularly hemp seeds, flax seeds, and chia seeds. Now, what you will find is that most of those seeds will have a may contain warning on them, so they might be cross-contaminated with nuts. Potentially, doesn't mean they contain nuts, but there might be some cross-contamination. There is this brand at the top here, Creative Nature, and they do chia seeds, which are guaranteed to not be cross-contaminated with nuts. If you're a smaller setting, the may contain warnings might not be such a problem. If you've only got 2 or 3 children and you know that they're already eating nuts, there's no reason why you can't have that may contain warning. If you're in a larger setting and you don't know, or you definitely have people with nut allergies, then you need to be careful with seeds. And chia seeds should be cooked or soaked. They shouldn't be put in raw, but they're really nice to add it to porridge, added into baking. You can make chia seeds puddings. Obviously, I wouldn't give small children whole pecans like this, but you can see this chia seed pudding here where you just soak it in some milk. Can be plant milk, can be dairy milk. It's really nice. And eggs are also another really good source of fat as well. That egg yolk is a really important source of choline. Choline is a key nutrient for brain health. Research indicates choline levels are often lower in neurodivergent populations, and it's really important for making a key neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is important for memory and focus. And we don't get a lot of choline in common foods. So one of the most common foods is fish. Again, also things like liver. I mean, how many families do you know that eat liver? Liver's a great food, but not many of us eat it nowadays. Sometimes when I'm making the spaghetti bolognese, I'll get the butcher to mince a couple of chicken livers into my mince and tell my children, but it's such a great food. Also, soya, sunflower seeds, quinoa, and peanut butter are good sources of choline as well. So we tend to hear more about sensory eating being more of a restrictive pattern, but of course, sensory eating can be an overeating pattern as well. You know, a lot of neurodivergent children really struggle to know when they're full. You do see a lot of weight problems in autistic children and adults. And what I would just say, advice around that is trying to fill up those children with foods that actually make them feel full. So going back to that blood sugar graph, you know, if we're eating white carbohydrates, white toast and honey for breakfast with a glass of orange juice, we're going to get that spike up of blood sugar and a big drop down, which means that we're then going to feel more hungry much more quickly. So to really support that kind of feeling of grounding and fullness, and you know, try to help children that, you know, want to constantly eat, let's try and really make them feel full. And so by really thinking about that blood sugar balance, getting in that protein, getting in those whole grains, getting in some healthy fats, filling up with lots of vegetables and a little bit of fruit, that's, you know, can be really, really helpful and supportive. Okay, so supporting the gut-brain axis is really, really important. So the gut microbiome is all those trillions and trillions of organisms that live in our digestive system, and they're so important. And what we see in neurodivergent children, there is quite a lot of research that that gut microbiome has a bit of an altered pattern. We call it dysbiosis. So we're seeing more organisms that might contribute to inflammation and might disrupt that gut microbiome and disrupt the gut-brain axis, and less of the organisms that are really helpful for a balanced gut microbiome and healthy brain function. So what we really want to be looking at is ways that we can support a really diverse and robust gut microbiome. And this picture kind of really says it all for me. It's about trying to get diversity into the diet. It's about trying to eat a rainbow. And of course, that can be really challenging with restrictive eaters, can't it? So it's just about trying to add in that little bit more color, because all those colors that you see there, they come from phytochemicals, so plant chemicals, which are really, really great fertilizers for the gut microbiome. So we want to try to encourage variety, a rainbow of vegetables and fruit. So in our training in a couple of months' time, we're going to focus in on, you know, how to support restrictive eaters to include more diversity in their diet. So if you're really struggling with that, that's going to be a really important training for you. So I would say for some children, it's really important to sneak some of that vegetables and fruit in. Put fruit into, if you're baking muffins or something like that, put fruit in porridge, sneak veg in, you know, like you might blend it first. My daughter says to me, you know, I don't care what you put in it, mum, but as long as I can't see it. And a lot of children do feel like that, some of the teenagers that I work with. So I tend to blend like my onions, my garlic, my courgettes, leeks, that kind of thing, to tiny, tiny pieces. And then when I put them in a bolognese or a stew or a sauce, you know, even a pizza sauce or something like that, they kind of all just melt in and you can't see that they're there. And of course you can blend afterwards to make it smooth. You want to do that alongside also encouraging children to accept that variety as well. So some education and exploration around food as well. You could make smoothies, you know, you could do baking with some fruit, as we talked about, you know, and I would really encourage children to get involved with food. Like you can buy really cool little plastic knives and boards that you can get children chopping lots of different veg, because don't forget, a lot of families won't have seen a lot of variety of vegetables and fruit. Some will have seen very, very little variety of vegetables and fruit, and children naturally have this neophobic response, which is fear of something new, which can be heightened in neurodivergent children. So really just trying to get them around different vegetables and fruits without the without any pressure to try it or even like it, and to just experience that with other senses, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we look at when we look at our restrictive eating. A lot of these we've talked about. Let's not forget fresh and dried herbs and spices, really, really great feeders for the gut microbiome as well. And also live yogurt and kefir. They provide actually that beneficial bacteria, that plain natural yogurt. Kefir is another really good one that's going to give that beneficial bacteria. Beans, pulses, also really important. Whole grains. Olive oil is a great food for the gut microbiome. Part of that Mediterranean diet, which has been so well researched and really linked to a healthier gut microbiome. Nuts and seeds, raw cacao powder, so a little bit of dark cacao powder put into porridge or something like that. It is a great source of iron and it's a great source of magnesium. I'm not talking about your kind of hot chocolate, your options hot chocolate type thing. You need proper good quality dark cacao or a little bit of dark chocolate as well. So eating that real nice rainbow of real food. So just going to scroll forward a little bit. Let's think about some of the vitamins and minerals. So I'm not going to go through every single vitamin and mineral. I think that will be boring. And, you know, I'm just going to pick out some of the key ones that we see deficient, potentially more likely to be deficient in neurodivergent individuals. Of course, anyone can be deficient in anything. And the key thing to remember with vitamins and minerals, it does come back to that diversity again. Vitamins and minerals and other nutrients, they work in harmony together. For example, your zinc and your copper need to be in balance so that you can really optimize your neurotransmitter balance. You need vitamin C to absorb iron. You need magnesium and vitamin D to absorb calcium. We tend to hear so much about calcium for our bones, don't we? That if we don't have enough magnesium and vitamin D, we're not going to absorb that calcium. We need vitamin D to absorb iron. So everything works in harmony. So again, it comes back to that diversity within the diet, which of course can be more challenging in neurodivergent individuals. So let's start with magnesium. I couldn't talk about neurodiversity without talking about magnesium. It's one of the most common mineral deficiencies in children. There is research to suggest that over 90% of ADHDers need more magnesium. And you're going to get more of an impact from magnesium where someone is already deficient. That's where you're going to see more of an impact on improvement, potentially to challenges and symptoms. It's so important for our nervous system. So when the nervous system is on over alert all the time, we are using up more magnesium as well as B vitamins and things like that. Also, it's really important for blood sugar control. So again, a child who's more magnesium deficient is much more likely to struggle with keeping their blood sugar levels balanced, and so then be more hungry, more hangry, more quickly after food. We also need it for our muscle stimulation. So for bowel movement, it's also really, really important as well. Deficiency signs of magnesium include tics, anxiety, restless legs, fidgetiness, that kind of, you know, that battery that never stops. My son does this. He's got ADHD traits. It's kind of like, you know, this constant moving all the time. Constipation, muscle aches, hyperactivity, hangry before meals, eye twitches. Of course, many things can cause those symptoms, but they can point to a magnesium deficiency. A lot of research, as I said, linking magnesium and ADHD. Good sources of magnesium include dark green leafy veg, nuts and seeds, fish, seafood, whole grains, avocado, beans, lentils, bananas, dried fruit, dark chocolate. One square provides about 95 milligrams. You know, it's quite a lot of magnesium in dark cacao and dark chocolate. Obviously, I wouldn't give dark cacao to very small babies, but, you know, a little bit of dark cacao in porridge, you know, as we go through that later weaning journey, you know, is a really great source of magnesium. I would just give it earlier in the day because it can be a little bit stimulatory. Add to baths. So we do absorb magnesium through the skin, which is really cool. And there are magnesium bath salts. Also, good old-fashioned Epsom salts are rich in minerals, including magnesium, so can be added to baths and foot soaks. There's a really nice brand called Better You, and they do magnesium salts for children. Obviously not your place to recommend supplements, but you might point families to their website so that they can have a little read and make sure that they choose anything that is age appropriate, you know, suitable for their age of children. Iron, we already talked, didn't we, about iron and how we need it to be able to create dopamine. It's so vital for the brain. There are links with ADHD and oppositional type behavior and low ferritin, which is iron stores. And optimal iron status might support our response to ADHD medication. As we'll talk about in the restrictive eating, low iron has been linked to higher rates of pica as well, which is where children put non-foods in their mouth and often swallow them. Iron's really important to balance toxic heavy metals as well. Key deficiency signs of iron. If a child is eating a diet high in beige ultra processed foods, we see that a lot with neurodivergent children, don't we? Going to potentially exacerbate high dairy intake because calcium can impact iron absorption. So if you get children that are stuck more on a milk or diet, a lot of children love dairy, loads of dairy, don't they? We need to make sure that we're supporting iron levels. If a child is vegan or vegetarian, they're much more likely to be iron deficient, but not always. What you do find with vegan vegetarian diets is often there is more care and concern about the diet. So parents potentially might be more educated about what is coming in, not always. Pale skin, pale inner eyes, fatigue, exercise causing fatigue, dizziness on standing, hair loss, brittle nails, sore tongue, and frequent tummy aches and lack of appetite might exacerbate iron deficiency. So here's some of your iron-rich foods: red meat, liver meat, liver and other organ meat, dark poultry meat. So chicken legs and chicken thighs are cheaper, but also they're higher in zinc and iron as well, rather than breast meat. Seafood and fish, lentils, pulses, pumpkin seeds, and other nuts and seeds, your dark green leafy veg. So if you want to make a smoothie, make a green smoothie. You know, actually, I often find green smoothies go down really well with kids. It's how you describe them. So call it a Shrek smoothie or an Incredible Hulk smoothie, and often they want to try it, or a green alien smoothie, whatever works. Put a little bit of something slightly sweet or creamy in there, like a bit of frozen banana. I find works really well with spinach, and maybe you could put a date or something like that in there. Dried fruit, also a good source of iron. Blackstrap molasses, you don't want to use much, but you could put a little bit in the flapjacks. Parsley and green herbs, peas, cacao, and dark chocolate. And we need those vitamin C rich foods alongside that iron to support absorption. So things like berries, cucumber, dark green leaves, kiwis. And then zinc. Zinc is so important for the neurodivergent brain. It's really, really important. We can't make dopamine and use dopamine without enough zinc. It's really, really important. It acts as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, which is actually what the impact of some of the ADHD medication is working on. So it's stopping dopamine being cleared. It can actually help dopamine to stay around for longer. It's really important for immune system support, for growth. So when we go through growth spurts, we're going to use up a lot of zinc, which is why you sometimes can see that exacerbation of behavioral challenges when a child has gone through a growth spurt. It's really important for our digestion. We can't make enough stomach acid without it. And without enough stomach acid, we can't absorb our zinc. So it's that kind of downward vicious cycle. And I see sometimes in the neurodivergent restrictive eaters I work with, sometimes I just start supplementing them with a little bit of zinc, because zinc is really, really important for digestion. And as we restrict our diet, we might become low in zinc, and low zinc can impact our sense of taste and smell. So it really impacts how we experience food. Some classic signs of zinc deficiency: stretch marks, white spots on the fingernails, pica, another deficiency sign, poor appetite, poor sense of taste or smell, a child that constantly is getting coughs and colds, slow growth, really important sign of zinc deficiency, loose bowel, and frequent tummy upsets. And here are some sources of zinc as well that you might want to have a look at: meat, fish, shellfish, whole grains, dairy, eggs, seeds of any kind, but particularly pumpkin seeds, nuts, mushrooms, beans, legumes, and lentils. Again, you know, pumpkin seeds might have that may contain warning on them. A lot of kids love them. One of the recipes I have the greatest success with a lot of the teenagers I work with is toasted seeds. We get a dry pan and we just throw some pumpkin seeds in, let them toast. They start to jump like popcorn does. Just shake it a little bit so they don't burn. And when they're nearly toasty, I put about per handful of pumpkin seeds, a tablespoon or two of soy sauce on. Obviously that is quite salty, so not so suitable for younger children, and obviously seeds are a choking risk for younger children. But you know, your 4-year-olds and above, if you do work with children of that age and above who can chew well, and you've got no concerns about choking, it creates a really salty snack, and children really, really love it. It's kind of a good replacement for crisps. And I can often find with a lot of the kind of, you know, primary and secondary school children I work with, that you can get them to have seeds in their lunch boxes. And finally, just vitamin D is so important. We can't respond to serotonin and we can't make dopamine without enough vitamin D. And, you know, are your families aware that all children that are aged from 6 months to age 5, unless they're still getting over a certain amount of formula milk daily, they are advised to be taking daily vitamin D. And that's especially relevant for those that have darker skin or are covering their skin, because you don't make so much vitamin D from the sunshine. And it is estimated over 80% of the population are low or deficient, and we don't get enough from our food. You'd have to eat a lot of oily fish and mushrooms to get enough vitamin D from our diet. I'd just like you to take a moment. I think it's really good with these talks, because I know I've given you a lot of information and maybe your brain's going, wow, where do I start? So I think it's quite nice just to take a moment to reflect. What are the 3 most relevant things you have learned today? Maybe just write those down. And is there one action point that you feel is really relevant for you that you can start to work on this coming week? I'm just going to pop up the date as well of the next event while you're doing that. And that's Thursday, the 19th of March, and we're going to focus in on sensory food challenges and restrictive eaters, which I know is so relevant for so many early years settings nowadays. And there are my contact details if anyone would like to follow me on Instagram, where I'm often posting more information.